Welcome to Sola Church Online.
I'm Alan Rigg. This is my wife, Miranda Landers, and together we lead Sola Church, a life-giving church in Santa Monica, California.
We meet in person and online on Sundays at 10 a.m. Pacific Time. Our in-person service is held indoors at Joslyn Park Auditorium, which is at 633 Kensington Road.
And our pre-recorded online service can be found on our website, solachurch.life, as well as on Facebook and YouTube. That's at Sola Church LA.
And we have a great service for you today. Let's worship.
He is jealous for me. He loves like a hurricane. I am a tree bending beneath the weight of his wind and mercy. When all of a sudden I am unaware, these afflictions eclipse my glory, and I realize just how beautiful you are and how great your affections are for me. And oh, how he loves us. Oh, oh, how he loves us. How he loves us. Oh. He is jealous for me. He loves like a hurricane. I am a tree bending beneath the weight of his wind and mercy. And all of a sudden I am unaware, these afflictions eclipsed my glory, and I realize just how beautiful you are and how great your affections are for me. And oh, how he loves us. Oh, oh, how he loves us. How he loves us. Oh, oh, he loves us. Oh, how he loves us. Oh, how he loves us. Oh, how he loves. Yeah, he loves us. Oh, how he loves us. Oh, how he loves us. Oh, how he loves. Yeah, he loves us. Oh, how he loves us. Oh, how he loves us. Oh, how he loves. We are his portion and he is our prize, drawn to redemption by the grace in his eyes. The grace is an ocean we're all sinking, and heaven meets earth like an unforeseen kiss, and my heart beats violently inside of my chest, and I don't have the time to maintain these regrets when I think about the way he loves us.
This is that time in our service when we worship with our giving. If you're just checking us out today, please don't feel like you have to participate. But if Sola Church is your church home or these online services have been a blessing to you, it's super easy to make a one-time tax-deductible donation or even to schedule a recurring gift.
The easiest way is to scan the QR code on your screen, but you can always go to solachurch.life and click the tab at the top that says Give.
Thank you so much for your generosity. You're making it possible for us to reach the west side of LA and beyond.
Let's get into our time of teaching.
So I told you recently about a t-shirt that was seen that said, "Lead us not into temptation. We can find it for ourselves." And isn't that the truth? Oh man, we are all tempted and we all sometimes sin. We all sometimes say yes when we should say no. And we all sometimes say no when we should say yes. For that reason, we all need answers. Answers to questions like, what is temptation? How are we tempted? How can we resist temptation? Let's go ahead and open to James chapter 1. Last week we started a series called Next Level. Like in life, it's easy to settle. But what if God is calling you to grow, to lead, to live boldly? That's why we are in this verse by verse series through the book of James called Next Level. It's all about practical, powerful faith that makes a difference in real life. Like this is the series that says, don't settle, go next level. So last week in our introduction, we were talking about how, life is filled with tests. Like we all have problems. There are no problem-free lives. And so last week we talked about how, from God's perspective, these problems are tests. But today we want to talk about how, from Satan's perspective, these problems are temptations. So let's begin by talking about the cause of temptation. And I just want to acknowledge, we did a series earlier this year in the Lord's Prayer. So it's only been a matter of weeks since we talked about temptation. And I'm going to repeat a few things here today, but we're also going to share some stuff that we didn't get into then. So hang in there. There's content here for everybody. Let's talk about the cause of temptation. James 1, beginning in verse 13, it says, "Let no one say when he is tempted, I am tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he himself tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desires and enticed." So when it comes to temptation, it's a matter of if, and not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. It's not if, but when, to say that more clearly. No one, as we said last week, is tempt exempt. And, we said that about testing, and we say that about temptation. In 1 Corinthians 10, verse 13, there's this verse that we leaned heavily into in the Lord's Prayer series, and I am going to remind you about it today. It says there that temptation is common to man, so we should expect temptation, and we should understand that we're going to be tempted. Sometimes we're going to fall. Sometimes we're going to fail. But what happens when we do? What happens when we are tempted? What happens when we do sometimes sin? You know what we normally resort to? We resort to what is sometimes called blame storming. If you haven't heard of that, you've heard of brainstorming. Well, this is similar, except we're trying to figure out who to blame for our own failure. Sometimes we blame others. We see that in the case study in Genesis where Adam blamed Eve. Adam sinned, Eve sinned, Adam sinned, and God confronted Adam with his sin. And Adam said, "The woman, she gave me of the tree and I ate." So, Adam right out of the gate was blaming someone else for his sin. And we do that. Sometimes we do that when we blame our parents. Like, no matter how far we get into our life, it's still our parents' fault that we are the way we are, or that we do the things that we do. If we don't blame our parents, maybe we blame our partner. This is what's happening when we say things like, "You started it." Like, I may have sinned, but you started it. Or when we say things like, "Well, I may have sinned, but if you wouldn't," Or I may have sinned, but you always ... Or I may have sinned, but you never ... That's a sign that we're not taking responsibility for our part, but we're seeking to blame our part on others. Sometimes we're so funny. Sometimes, somebody will say something along these lines that just makes it really, really obvious that they're not taking responsibility for their life or for their own sins. But sometimes we blame the devil. And that's what Eve did. When God confronted Eve with her sin, she blamed the devil. In Genesis 3, verse 13, she said, the serpent deceived me and I ate. So in some sense, she was correct. I mean, Satan had tempted her. Twice in the Bible, Satan is actually called the tempter. We've joked before that he runs a tempt agency. And I think about that comedian Flip Wilson that used to have a routine. He had this whole bit about how his wife would do something crazy. And then when he called her out for it, she would say, the devil made me do it. It was hilarious. If you're not familiar with that, you're going to have to Google it. But yeah, sometimes if we don't blame other people, we blame the devil. And then sometimes, as hard as it is to imagine, sometimes we blame God. Like going back again to Adam, when God confronted Adam turned it right back around on God. Whenever he said, the woman, she gave me of the tree and I ate. I left part out on purpose. I saved it until now. He said, the woman whom you gave to be with me, she gave me of the tree and I ate. Like, she wasn't even my idea. She was your idea. It's your fault that I'm in this mess. Someone said to err is human, but to blame it on the divine is even more human. And I've said before that, honestly, the God set me up to fail people are no different than the devil made me do it people. In both cases, we're just blaming someone else. We're just refusing to take responsibility for our own lives. But it's funny, some of the things people will say, like, somebody who's dating someone they really shouldn't be dating. If God didn't want me to be with her, he wouldn't have brought her into my life. Where did you meet her? Tinder. Really? And you're sure God brought her into your life. Or I remember this one young woman who was totally serious when she came to me to tell me many years ago that she had lost her job because she had stolen from her employer. And she, what she wanted to know? She didn't want to know, like, how she could fix this. She didn't want to know how she could grow and, become someone whose employer could trust them. Instead, she wanted to know why God would let her do that. She was mad at God. It was God's fault that God hadn't stopped her, hadn't kept her from doing it. Imagine that. So, yeah, we blame other people, we blame the devil, we blame God. But here it makes it real clear that God is not to blame. God is too holy to be tempted, and he's too loving to tempt. He does, however, allow us to be tempted. But that verse in 1 Corinthians 10, verse 13, it says, God will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able. So, we've emphasized many times before, I think it was Warren Wiersbe who first put it this way, but, when God is testing us, he's testing us to bring out our best. But oftentimes in that very same set of circumstances, Satan is tempting us to bring out our worst. Part of our struggle with temptation is our inability to understand this, to understand that there's two distinct things happening at one time. I'm having a problem, but in this problem is both a test and a temptation. The test is from God, the temptation is from Satan. The test is intended to bring out my best. The tempting and the temptation is intended to bring out my worst. So verse 14 again, but each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desires and enticed. So, man, if you want to go next level in your life, well, here's how not to do it. The way not to do it is to place blame. Don't, if you're going to blame other people, you're not going to go to the next level in your life. To go to the next level in your life, you and we've got to take responsibility for ourselves and for our sin. This is an example of what this book is about. We said last week that this book is about maturity. It's about growing up. It's about spiritual adulting. Blame storming is childish. Spiritual adulting means taking responsibility. So the funny thing is, when it comes to the people that we blame for our sin, my problem isn't with other people. I may think it is, but it's not. My problem isn't with God. I may think it is, but it's not. My problem isn't even with the devil, even though there's some truth to that. My ultimate problem is ultimately with me. And we're going to talk more about that. But how does this all work? So, talking about temptation today, we've talked about the cause. Let's talk about the consequences. We're picking it up in verse 15. It says, "Then, when desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, brings forth death. Do not be deceived, my beloved brethren." So James describes 3 stages: the desire stage, the sin stage, and the death stage. Let's talk about those and in that order. Let's talk first about the desire stage. That Greek noun translated desire in verse 13 is neutral. It's not good or bad. It's not right or wrong. It's neutral. It means longing. And we can long for good things and we can long for bad things. We can long for right things. We can long for wrong things. People imagine a God who hates all forms of pleasure, which is crazy when you think about it, because God created pleasure. I mean, think about the senses. Take sight, for example. You and I could see even if we couldn't see in color. There are some people who are colorblind. And if we couldn't see in color, we would still be able to see. And yet, God has given us the ability to see all of these vibrant colors. It's the God of pleasure. What about the sense of smell? Like I would still breathe even if I couldn't smell things. But I love the smell of things, don't you? There are bad smells, of course, but there are so many good smells. There are so many things that smell so good. But if I couldn't smell those things, it wouldn't keep me from breathing. But God created the sense of smell. He's the God of pleasure. Think about taste. Part of the fun of food is what it tastes like, right? Now, if I couldn't taste anything, I would still eat because I would still have an appetite. My body would still need food. Maybe I wouldn't enjoy it the same way, but I wouldn't just stop eating if I couldn't taste things. And so yet God has created the sense of taste. He's given us the ability to savor, bitter and sweet and sour and salty and all those kinds of things. He's the God of pleasure. So God created pleasure. He doesn't want us to be controlled by it. He wants us to control it. And that's why he's created boundaries to keep us happy, healthy, and whole. When we're talking about sin, we're talking about there being boundaries. And sin is when we cross those boundaries, for example. I've talked before about how there seem to be sort of these 2 views about God when it comes to the rules. And that is a God who, thought that he had these amazing rules, and so he created people to keep them. Or this God who thought that he had these amazing people, and so he created rules to keep them. And that's the way it is. God's not in love with the rules. He didn't create people to keep these rules because he loved these rules so much. He created people, and he loves those people so much that he created the rules. He created the boundaries to keep them. So, the temptation that we experience is so often temptation to fulfill God-given desires outside the will of God. It's not that the desires are wrong in themselves. The longings are not wrong in themselves, but temptation wants to take those outside of these God-given boundaries, outside of his will. And our flesh, which is, a Bible-y word, sort of a theological word, it refers to our fallen, sinful self, our old self, our broken self. That part of us is predisposed that way. It's predisposed to want to fulfill those God-given desires, even if it's outside the will of God, even if we have to go outside the boundaries to do it. So as we said in the Lord's Prayer series, it's not a sin to be tempted. It's a sin to sin, but it's not a sin to be tempted. Jesus was tempted, but as the Bible says, without sin. The apostles were tempted. Every human being is tempted. It's when we allow temptation to grow into specific acts of sin. And so you'll notice, in verse 14, just to double back to what it said in verse 14, James talked about how each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desires and enticed. I don't know for sure, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say that James might have been an outdoorsman. He might have been the kind of guy that likes to hunt and fish. Why do I say that? Well, because the phrase drawn away in verse 14 refers to baiting a trap, like hunting. And the word enticed in verse 14 refers to baiting a hook, like fishing. So hunting and fishing. Now, I could talk a little bit about traps. I have a little bit of experience with a trap. When I bought my first home, my first house in Austin, Texas, we had an attic. And at some point, I came to the conclusion that there was an animal living in our attic, because at night I would hear these little, like footsteps in the attic. And I thought that there must be a squirrel or something like that living in the attic. I went to this place where I could buy a trap. It looked kind of like a cage. And, you would put bait in the trap. And then if the animal were to go into the trap to get the bait, as soon as it took the bait, the trap would slam shut. And so the animal would be captured. It was totally humane. It wasn't going to hurt the animal in any way. It would simply capture the animal. And so, of course, I was listening for anything that would clue me into the fact that I'd captured this animal. But I was also sticking my head up into the attic to look and see if there was anything in that trap. And we never caught the critter. Eventually the noises stopped, but I tried over a period of time to capture it. I would even, it was recommended to us by the salesperson that we use cat food to lure the animal. So, that's what I was putting in there as the bait, was like an open thing of cat food. And so I had to replace the cat food every so often to keep it fresh. We never caught anything. Now, I don't know what I was going to do if I had caught it. Like, I hadn't really thought it all the way through. Once I had that squirrel or that raccoon or whatever it was going to be in that cage, I'm not sure what was going to happen next. I'm not sure where I was going to take it, how I was going to release it into the wild, or what I was going to do with it. I really, really hadn't planned it all the way through. But, at one point, many years later, I was thinking about that trap, and I thought, you know what? I have no idea where that trap is. I had sold that house. I'd bought another house. I'd moved. I had no idea whatever happened to that trap. And then it occurred to me, I'm pretty sure I left that trap in that attic. I don't know how much time passed before the new owners of that house went into that attic, but when they did, they found an animal trap and some pretty smelly cat food in the trap. Now, when it comes to fishing, I've never had a whole lot of luck fishing. I think I made a fishing joke recently. Maybe it was last week. I forget now. But I had a friend who was really into fishing. And I remember one day he showed me one of his lures. It was this really sophisticated lure. Like, it had a spinner on it. And it had a faux fish, something that resembled a fish, something that a larger fish would certainly mistake for a fish that it could eat. And it was really interesting as he described it to me, because I saw so many analogies in that. Like, the spinner reminds me, we talked about how I have a problem, and it's both a test from God and it's a temptation from Satan. And the spinner kind of reminds me of that, because my fisherman friend told me that the spinner agitates the fish. And so, we get agitated in the midst of our problems. Maybe we get mad at God. But maybe at the very least, we start to think about, how, well, God's doesn't have my back. He's not taking care of me. And we get distracted and we get agitated, and that leads to our downfall. But then the faux fish, the thing that looks like a fish to a bigger fish, that reminds me of how we've talked about that temptation is not necessarily a wrong desire. It's just a desire. It's a temptation to fulfill that desire outside of the will of God. So the desire goes from good to bad, right? And in that sense, like, it's not bad or wrong for a fish to need to eat. Fish need to eat. They do. They need to eat. but it's a really bad idea for them to eat that faux fish, right? And so that reminds me, that our desires are these God-given desires, but still God tells us, don't take that, because that's not really what you need. That's really not what you want. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, but this gives us a little bit of insight into this idea about this first stage, the desire stage. After the desire stage comes the sin stage. Verse 15, it says, then desire has conceived. It gives birth to sin. So desire conceives a method for taking the bait. I think about Romans 13, verse 14, that says, make no provision for the flesh to fulfill its lusts. In other words, don't conceive a method to take the bait. As soon as we do that, we're in trouble. Whatever the temptation is for you, like as soon as you start conceiving of a way to get to that place, to get access to that thing, to create a window of time to do that thing, a way to participate in that thing, whatever it is, at that point, instead of setting ourselves up to succeed, we're setting ourselves up to fail. So what settings are you in when you are tempted? Are you conceiving of how to get yourself to that place? No, avoid that place. What props do you have that encourage you to sin? Are you conceiving of a way to get your hands on those things? No, don't do that. Eliminate those things. What people are you usually with when you are tempted? Are you conceiving of a way to get with those people? No, you may need to avoid them, even if only for a season. And so after the sin stage comes the death stage. And so notice in verse 15, and sin, when it is full grown, brings forth death. So again, this is the death stage, not the Death Star. That's the wrong story, although this service will premiere on May the 4th, so May the 4th be with you. But it's the death stage. I remember, when I was a teenager, I had a friend who was a couple years older than me, and so he got his driver's license a couple years before me. And I can remember him telling me about the gory movies. Maybe if you are a person of a certain age, you remember seeing gory movies as part of driver's ed. There were a whole bunch of those. They were scare films. Maybe the most famous was the one called Red Asphalt, where they showed actual footage of the scenes of accidents, and the whole idea was like to scare new drivers straight, man, to freak you out to the point where you wanted to be a really super responsible driver. And in some way, that's what James is doing here. He's trying to scare us straight. He's trying to let us know, what can happen when we go down this path. You notice the reference here to death. And that takes us again all the way back to Genesis and to that initial case study in temptation and in sin. God had told Adam that, when he ate of the forbidden fruit, that he would die. And Adam, would eventually die physically. That process began the moment that he ate the fruit. But he also died immediately spiritually. He experienced a spiritual kind of death. And we experienced that too. C.S. Lewis once said that every time we make a wrong moral choice, it leaves a scar on our conscience. Multiple scars soon create a callus, and eventually our conscience grows numb. So for us, even as followers of Jesus, even as people of faith, like our inner life can dry up and die when we take this path. But notice in verse 16, it says, do not be deceived, my beloved brethren. Now here's a pro tip, man. You ready for a pro tip when it comes to Bible reading and Bible study? Here it is. Anytime you see that phrase, do not be deceived, pay careful and close attention. Like you should red flag that immediately. Circle it, highlight it, underline it, draw arrows to it. If the writer says, do not be deceived, it is something that we are almost certain to be deceived about. So going back to the lure that I described for you, the spinner on the lure distracts the fish. The faux fish deceives the larger fish. But maybe one thing we haven't really talked about is how they, and in particular the faux fish, hides the hook. In one of these sophisticated lures, the hook is hidden by. It's camouflaged by the faux fish. And when you and I are being tempted, so too is the personal cost hidden. We don't realize what it's going to cost us. We think maybe we do, but we don't. We don't realize the full cost to us. James is trying to highlight that when he describes it as a kind of death. But it's hidden from us. And not only is the personal cost hidden from us, but so too is the collateral damage. I've said it before, I'm going to say it again. We may be alone when we sin, but we never sin alone. And one thing we often don't think about is how our sin is going to affect other people around us, how our spouse is going to be affected, how our children are going to be affected, how our friends are going to be affected, how our coworkers are going to be affected, how our neighbors may be affected, like on and on we could go. If we don't make better choices, like if nothing else, we're robbing them of the person that we could be and the relationship that we could have if only we made better choices. So temptation, we talked about the cause and the consequences, but finally we want to talk about the cure. Look at verse 17 and 18. Every good gift and every perfect gift is from above and comes down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow of turning. Of his own will he brought us forth by the word of truth, that we might be a kind of first fruits of his creatures. Now there's a lot here. I can't bring out every single thing in these verses. I'm going to hope that you have your appetite whet to want to dig a little deeper. But that 1 Corinthians passage I've referenced several times now, in 1 Corinthians 10 verse 13, it says that with the temptation, God will also make the way of escape. So when you and I are being tempted, our first job is to start looking for the way of escape. And we get a key piece of that right here. Part of the way of escape is to focus on God's goodness. That's the emphasis of verse 17. The point here is that every good thing comes from God. If it doesn't come from God, it isn't good, and you don't want it. Another lesson that comes from this, and this is really relevant when we think about rushing ahead of God and trying to fulfill a God-given desire outside of God's will, listen to this. Every good thing that you need today, you have. You have it today. You have it right here and right now. You have every good thing that you need today. Now, you may not have what you need for tomorrow or for next week or for next month or for next year or for the next season of your life, but I'm telling you, follower of Jesus, person of faith, I'm telling you that you have every good thing that you need right here, right now for today. So that should be a huge encouragement and why we could just cool our jets and resist the temptation to get ahead of God and to go outside of God's will. When Eve was tempted, she questioned God's goodness. Another case study is the temptation of Jesus recorded in the Gospels. When Jesus was tempted, Satan tempted him to question God the Father's goodness. And remember when King David sinned, we studied this a year or so ago, when King David committed adultery and murder, God said to him, like, remember all the good things that I've done for you. And it says in 2 Samuel 12, verse 8, if that had been too little, I also would have given you much more. Wow. So we need to reflect on the goodness of God. Also, if I can just add this, if I can insert this, Bible reading. Don't underestimate the value of Bible reading. Psalm 119, verse 11, your word I have hidden in my heart that I might not sin against you. And prayer. In the Lord's Prayer, we were taught, lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. So we can pray and ask for God's help. So again, reflecting on God's goodness, practicing gratitude, Bible reading, prayer. These are essential in our fight against temptation. Again, in verse 18 says that God has brought us forth by the word of truth, that we might be a kind of first fruits of his creature. Brought us forth, that is, birthed us. So in addition to reflecting on God's goodness, we can reflect on our newness. What am I talking about? Well, the way Jesus said it in John chapter 3 was that we must be born again, or to put it another way, we must be born from above. So when you put together these and other Bible verses that talk about this same thing, the idea is that when we're born into this world, we are physically and emotionally alive, but spiritually dead. In some way, the spiritual part of us is dead. And when we trust Jesus to forgive us and lead us, God makes that part of us alive. It's described for us in 2 Corinthians 5, verse 17, where it says, therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. Old things have passed away. Behold, all things have become new. And so at this point, as a follower of Jesus, I have an old nature and a new nature. I have who I was and I have who I'm becoming. And they are both predisposed. I talked about the predisposition of the old nature. The old nature is predisposed to sin, but the new nature is predisposed not to. Paul talks a lot about this in Romans chapter 7. You can check it out. But so my calling is to live from that new place, to settle into this new way of being in the world. I want to starve the old and I want to feed the new, and I want to live from that new place, which I'm encouraged to do. And I'm reminded that God, the Holy Spirit, indwells me and empowers me to do exactly that. So we talked about temptation, the cause, the consequences, and the cure. Man, don't settle. Go next level. You're going to have problems in your life. On God's part, it's a test. It's an opportunity for your best to be brought out. But in that same situation is a temptation from the evil one, from the tempter, from the devil. And it's an occasion where our worst might be brought out. And we get to decide, will we reflect on God's goodness? Will we reflect on our newness? In the strength that God's Spirit, who indwells us and empowers us, gives, can we live from that new place? We can. And that's part of the secret in the problems of life, of going to the next level. Father, help us to take this to heart. Help us to think deeply about these things, to reflect on them throughout the week, and to understand. Again, it's a mind shift thing. We've got to change the way we think about our problems. And one of those changes has got to come from reflecting on your goodness and on our newness, on trusting you to fulfill all of these God-given desires in the right way, at the right time. And Lord, to live from that new place, to live from that new creation, to lean hard into the power that you give us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
And now it's time to fill out a Connect card.
Yeah, just go to our website, solachurch.life, and scroll to the bottom of the homepage. That's where the Connect card lives. It's where you can let us know that you watched for the first time today. It's also where you can request information about our virtual small group. Super fun. We'd love for you to be a part.
And don't forget, go and follow Sola Church on social media.
Right, totally. It's at Sola Church LA on all your favorite apps. Let's connect.
And we hope that everyone has a great week. And we will see you next time at Sola Church Online.
Bye, everybody.